Hey kids, this is Ivan. I'd like to talk to you today a little bit about sandbox games in D&D. You know, whether it be old school or new school, it really doesn't matter. Now, people argue ad nauseum on web forums about the virtues and drawbacks of sandbox games versus story-driven games, railroads, the whole gamut. And people a lot of times will misunderstand what sandboxes are. And it's just as true. I've misunderstood when somebody's talking about a story-driven game. I've assumed they meant a railroad game, and they've kind of like, you set me straight in terms of what the heck they were trying to do. But the biggest definition I could give you for a sandbox game right off the bat that would differentiate it from a story-driven game is kind of from like not a D&D perspective, but maybe from like an alternate history, alternate reality, modern game. A story-driven game would be something like, well, it's World War II, and your mission is to kill Hitler. A sandbox game would start out, it's 1939, you're in Paris, France. The same thing could possibly happen in the same games in terms of the final outcome, in terms of what the characters choose to do, but there's a lot more latitude because the players are free to do whatever they want. Even more so than the story-driven game. They can literally go in any direction. These people can end up in Bolivia, Connecticut. They could go, to Germany. They could go to Russia. They could do whatever they'd like to do. They can follow, any kind of lead. And I like that in a sandbox-style game. Frank Menser actually gave one of the best descriptions of what a sandbox game is. And the quote is, "A sandbox is an imaginary environment within which the game master has built enough railroad tracks to create the illusion that the players aren't being railroaded." And to me, that makes perfect sense because a sandbox game can contain, a buttload of plots and things and storylines and things to follow. It's up to the players to decide, like, which ones do I want to do, which ones do I want to ignore, etc. And as things go, time goes on, these things keep happening, whether or not the players are involved with them or not. Now, one of the other things that I do with a sandbox game is, when I start it off, I'll do the same thing. I'll have a bunch of plots. So in my current game, there's a hobgoblin army that's kind of taking over the world from the north, and they haven't quite hit the city where the characters started at yet, but they keep on hearing rumors, and army people will come down and like, this city's been taken, this city's been taken, this leader's been assassinated, this other guy, we're not sure if he's a doppelganger or what he is, and the hobgoblins are doing this, they're doing that. So the players have the option of maybe going and finding out like what's going on with all that. Maybe they'll infiltrate the hobgoblin empire. At the same time, they've examined, or unearthed this cult where people are worshiping lithids and things even nastier, and it's almost like Cthulhu-esque. And do they really want to like go down that line and really, figure out what this cult is all about? And at the same time, there's stories about a necromancer that's awakened after 400 years that's causing all kinds of problems, and they're meeting some of her flunkies, that sort of thing. There's another magic user who's like, trapped on a pocket plane that's sending him for, on a quest to get little certain items, but they're not quite sure who he is. Like, what's his deal? Is he going to be a good guy or a bad guy if they ever help him get released? And there's a zillion more things. There's stuff happening in the south in terms of Sahuagin, attacks, and is this a real big issue? Is it not a big issue? And there's plenty of lands to the west and to the south that have just never been explored in 1,000 years. They're free to just go there and find out what's going on. And likewise, to the east, you can hop a boat, go on the sea, and there's legendary islands you can go check out. So there's a bunch of stuff happening at any given time, and even within that, in the local area, there's all kinds of rumors. There's problems in the Shire lands, gnolls are attacking there, there's problems with somebody getting abducted here. So they're allowed to kind of go in whatever direction they'd like and do what they want to do. Now, one of the other things people will say about a sandbox game is it takes too much work. You need to like stat and do everything, and nothing could be further from the truth. When I run a sandbox game, what I tend to do is use like a really focused approach to where the players start out. Like, where are you right now? That town, the surrounding towns, I'll know them. I'll know who lives there, what's up there, what's up with the political situation, who the major players are, etc. The farther away you get from the epicenter, if you will, the fuzzier things get, and they're not, I know some of the stuff about that place, and I can certainly make it up as I go along, and I know some of the political stuff, but it's not quite as in detail. But if the players choose to go there, then of course, I'll stat it up. A lot of times at the end of the game, you can ask, well, where are you going to go next time? And they'll say, we're going to go east to this town. And okay, well, I'll do some stuff, over there to kind of flesh it out. The other thing that allows us to do is, as players and DM, if a player wants to say, well, geez, I'm from Area X, and I really haven't statted out Area X completely, the player can say, well, geez, I'm from here, and this is what's going on here, or I'm this so-and-so's son, or whatever. And if it's too crazy, I'll give it some veto power. But a lot of times, they are able to come up with some really nifty stuff, and I'll be like, okay, well, yeah, you know that stuff, because you were from that area, so we'll kind of like work with that city and make it a little bit like you say it was. And that gives the players a little bit of a sense of ownership over the whole Sandbox campaign as well. I'm not going to let them dictate everything about it, but I'll let them have some input, so that can be a lot of fun, as well. So just because you might have you want to start out with a social contract, where we're going to play a sandbox game or a story-driven game, that doesn't always need to happen. This kind of thing. I mean, certainly you should talk about it, but at any point during a sandbox game, with all the various plots that are going on, it can turn into a very story-driven game at any moment. If the players decide that they want to hop the A train and go see wherever it leads and get deeper and deeper and deeper into that mystery, and then find out who these people are and who's behind everything, I'm there. I'll let them do that sort of thing. The difference is between that and a story-driven game, and at any time they want to hop that A train and say, the heck with this, it's getting a little bit too crazy, a little bit too lethal, or it's just not as interesting, they're free to go and hop on something else and try something else out. Now, whatever's going on that A train, whatever these bad people are, if it's the Hobgoblin Army or the Necromancer, these people are still going to keep on doing what they're doing. So the world may change, in Area X while the players are exploring Area Y. And to me, this is natural and organic. That's what would happen in the real world should you devote your attention to Kansas and not really worry about New Hampshire. If things are going to happen in New Hampshire, when you get back to New Hampshire, they might be a little bit different. So that's pretty much how I handle a sandbox game. To me, it's a lot of fun. It's not a super amount of work, because the work I do is based on where the players go and what they want to do. And the story becomes more about what the players did and less about what I, as a DM, want them to do. And that's really cool, because I swear, when we have our games, some weeks I've been I have no idea what they're going to do. And we had an encounter one time where pretty much they had cleared out a temple. I had statted it with some bandits rather that took over the temple, because nature abhors a vacuum. And they're going to camp there that night. They just killed something. I figured we'll do a wandering check. Oh, geez, the bandits are going to show up. And I figured, well, this is probably going to be a fight, and the party might take some hits. They'll probably kill these bandits. Instead, they invite him over to the fire. I do a little reaction check. The bandits react rather well. They're cutting them off hunks of this, animal they just, cooked. And next thing you know, they're best buddies. And the leader of the party knows that the neighboring town really needs some extra muscle, because she's worried about attacks from an adjacent town. And instead of it becoming this fight, next thing you know, the party is actually negotiating treaties between these bandits, which have been causing all kinds of trouble, and the neighboring town as defense against the other towns in the area. This is something I couldn't have made up, but it's really cool. So I suggest that you try sandbox games. They're not as scary as you think, and they can be a lot more fun.